Lesson T6, we are solving trig equations, okay? So when we did identities, we just wanted to verify, we just wanted to prove that one side was equal to the other. Now we are actually solving, so it's going to be more like what you did in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, where we're getting something by itself. If there is only one trig function, we just want to get that trig function by itself. So these two examples are already solved. The trig function is by itself. We just have sine x equals 1. And so to figure out what x is actually equal to, we are going to look on the unit circle, and we're just going to give unit circle angles where sine is equal to 1. Okay, so if I look at the unit circle, I'm looking for any angle where sine is equal to 1. And remember that on the unit circle, x is the cosine and y is the sine. So right here, sine is 1. And that's the only place around the whole circle where sine is equal to 1. So my solution is going to be x equals pi over 2, because that is the angle that has a sine of 1. Alright, here we have tangent of x equals square root of 3. Again, this is already solved. The trig function is by itself. And I want to know what angles have a tangent of the square root of 3. So again, we're looking at the unit circle. And remember that tangent is sine over cosine. So I'm going to kind of give this to you as a shortcut. I'm not going to go through doing y over x and simplifying, okay? The tangent of pi over 6 is square root of 3 over 3. The tangent of pi over 4 is 1, and the tangent of pi over 3 is just the square root of 3. Okay, I got that by doing sine over cosine and simplifying. I'm not going to go through the math right now. But what you need to know is that just like the cosine and sines repeat themselves around the circle, so do the tangents. So anything that is over 6 is going to have a tangent of square root of 3 over 3. So over here, all right, it's going to be square root of 3 over 3, and it's going to be negative because one of my values is negative. Down here, where it's over 6, is going to be square root of 3 over 3. This one's going to be positive. Down here over 6, square root of 3 over 3, and that one's going to be negative. And it's the same for all of them. So anything that's over 4 is going to be 1. So this is negative 1, positive 1, negative 1. All right, anything that's over 3 is square root of 3. So this would be negative square root of 3, positive square root of 3, negative square root of 3. Okay, so we are looking for where tangent is equal to the square root of 3. Alright, so that would be right here at pi over 3, and then down here at 4 pi over 3. So I'm actually going to have two solutions here. I'm going to say x is equal to pi over 3 or 4 pi over 3, because that's the places on the unit circle where tangent is equal to the square root of 3. Alright, now in this one we have a little bit of work to do because the trig function is not by itself. So this is going to be very much like an Algebra 1 equation where we're trying to get x by itself, except we're trying to get cosine of x by itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is add 1 to both sides. So now I have 2 cosine squared x equals 1. The next thing I would need to do is divide both sides by 2. So now cosine squared x equals 1/2. Alright, and I have cosine squared, and I want just regular cosine, so I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Alright, so now we have to do a little simplifying. So this is just cosine of x, okay? When you take the square root of a fraction, it's the square root of the top number divided by the square root of the bottom number. And I'm just going to simplify this thing. So the square root of 1 is 1. So I have 1 over the square root of 2, and remember that we need to get radicals out of the bottom. So now I end up with square root of 2 over 2. So I'm looking for where cosine of x equals the square root of 2 over 2. So I'm going to go back to my unit circle. Alright, cosine is an x value, so I'm looking for x value of square root of 2 over 2. I have 1 here at pi over 4. This is negative, so I don't want that one. This is negative, so I don't want that one. And here is 7 pi over 4. So my answers are going to be x is equal to pi over 4 and 7 pi over 4. Alright, that third example there is one where we have two trig functions. So anytime there is more than one trig function there, it's going to have to be solved by factoring. Okay, this one is going to be a common factor. I have two terms and they both have a cosine of x in it. So just like we did when we did verifying, I can factor out that cosine of x. I can pull it out as a factor. And so I would be left with 2 sine x, because this one would go away, and then minus 1. equals 0. And now if we go back to algebra 1 or 2, you remember when we have two factors and equal to 0, we're going to set each of them equal to 0. So I have cosine of x equals 0 and 2 sine x minus 1 equals 0. And then we're going to solve both of these. So cosine of x equals 0, that's already done. I need to find values of x where cosine is 0. So I'm back on my unit circle. All right, cosine is 0 right here and right here. So pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. So x equals pi over 2 or x equals 3 pi over 2. And then I also need to solve this one. All right, if I add 1 to both sides, now I have 2 sine x equals 1. Divide by 2 to get the sine part by itself. So sine of x equals 1/2. So now I'm going to look on the unit circle and say where's sine equal to 1/2. All right, well, at pi over 6. All right, at 5 pi over 6, sine is 1/2. Down here, sine's negative, sine's negative. So I have 4 solutions this time. All right, I also have x equals pi over 6 or 5 pi over 6. So I have a total of 4 different angles that could make this statement true. Okay, and then last example, so here these are both sine, but this one is sine squared and this one is sine of x, so we cannot combine them. So we're going to have to solve this one by factoring as well. I think the easiest thing for you guys to do here would be, because the sine part makes it look confusing. So I'm going to actually take those out and have 2x squared plus x minus 1 equals 0. And now this is something that you learned how to factor in algebra 1. Okay, so remember I'm looking for things that multiply to a times c, so multiply to -2, all right, and then add up to my middle term, which is 1. So I need numbers that multiply to -2 and add up to +1. So that would be +2 and -1. All right, and then remember, anytime we have something here, you might have learned this by slide and divide, or to rewrite it and then factor by grouping. I'll show you grouping. If you learn slide and divide, and that's the way you know how to do it, that's fine too. So I'm going to rewrite this middle term as plus 2x minus 1x minus 1, and then I'm going to separate this into 2 groups and factor those 2 groups. So here my greatest common factor is 2x, and I'm left with x plus 1. Here, my common factor is -1, and I'm left with x plus 1. All right, so then my factors are 2x minus 1, because that's the outside, and then x plus 1, because that's the inside. This is all a review of factoring, so if you need help with that, that's something we're going to have to do in class. I'm going kind of fast because the point of this is solving trig equations, not factoring, which you should already know. Once I get here, I have it factored. Now, where there's an x, I'm going to put it back as sine, because we took them out at the beginning, so I'm going to put them back in. So now I have 2 sine x minus 1, and then sine of x plus 1. And just like we did last time, we're going to set each factor equal to 0 and solve both of those. Okay, so on this side, add 1, 2 sine x equals 1, divide by 2. So sine of x equals 1/2. So when I go back to my unit circle, I'm going to look for where is sine equal to 1/2. Over here, I need to subtract 1 from both sides. So sine of x equals -1. So I'm looking on my unit circle for where is sine equal to 1/2. All right, so where is sine equal to 1/2? Right here and right here. So pi over 6 and 5 pi over 6. And then I also need to know where sine is equal to -1. So sine is -1 down here at 3 pi over 2. So I'm going to add that as one of my answers. Okay, so there's my 3 possible solutions: pi over 6, 5 pi over 6, and 3 pi over 2. Okay, and that's it for solving equations. If you need a review of factoring, we can do that when you get to class, but that's a skill you should already know. Right, and then also you will be given a filled-in unit circle for this unit, so you don't have to worry about, I don't remember the unit circle. We're going to give it to you. You just have to be able to read it.